Welcome back for another episode of Growing Lemon Trees from Seeds. It's day 825. These two plants are going nowhere fast. If you watch my last episode, you'll see that the second born didn't re-sprout after all that damage that occurred since the last apartment. And for the firstborn, it's doing okay, but it's not growing very fast, and you can see that the top of the stem is not really sprouting anything either. So the leaves look okay down here, but they're not a dark green. It's had a lot of trouble adapting to the sun. You can see a little bit of webbing on one of those leaves, gluing it to another leaf. There are bugs and other problems as well. Alright, so now I'm going to go over all the prep work I did for this upcoming transplant. Here you can see me preheating the oven to 250 Fahrenheit. That's 121 Celsius, well above boiling point. And I'm doing this just to be on the safe side to sterilize my Coco coir, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is a medium that shouldn't contain bugs or pests according to the manufacturer, but there is a tiny minority of Amazon reviewers that said they grew this, used this to grow plants and had bugs. So you can never be too safe. This is my first time using Coco coir. Some of my users suggested this a decade ago, and I never listened back then, but I'm always considering new ideas, and since the whole sand and clay soil, filtered clay soil mixture hasn't been working out that well in those double stacked Rubbermaid trash cans with drilled holes. I've decided to go with this because I don't want to drag around hundreds of pounds of sand and clay anymore. So just for the convenience factor, I'm going to go with this. So there's a brick, and you add 25 liters, 6.6 gallons of water, and you should get 55 liters or almost 15 gallons of puffed up hydrated Coco coir. So this is what it looks like shrink wrapped, and you can see there's already some holes in it. So it's very dry, and if this package were to get water seeping in, then it would bust open, kind of like those mattresses that inflate out of the box upon exposure to air. So I've seen a lot of videos of this, and I've done some research online, and basically this thing expands like crazy when it comes into contact with water. So I'm going to bake my brick. So that weighs 5 kilos or 11 pounds. It's not too heavy, and it basically turns into this huge volume afterwards. So after 2 hours of baking, the brick cracked, but it didn't burn or give off any smells. So there were no smells before, and there are no smells during or after. So this bake surely killed any parasites that may have been present. And I think this should allay any fears about spider mite eggs or other unknown exotic pests infesting my plants after I do this transplant, because these are made from coconut fibers from India, I believe. So here's my new setup, 5-gallon plastic pots with these matching saucers on the bottom. So this is another purchase off of Amazon, and I'm switching to this setup plus Coco coir just for the convenience factor. As I said, I don't want to deal with hundreds of pounds of sand and clay soil anymore. I want a very well aerated growing medium and pot setup. So you can see there's all these holes and slits at the bottom. They're not obnoxiously big, but they're big enough to get plenty of air circulation coming in through the bottom, which is really important. So they're not perfect, as you can see here. This one has some defects, but they're more aesthetic than most of the other stuff I saw on Amazon. So I just decided to go with this. And of course, I'm not happy with that defect right there, but I'm in a hurry. I don't want to deal with returns and waiting for another set and blah, 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 just if it's just one pot. So I'm going to check out the other 4, and I don't think it's worth it to deal with returns for something that I need right now. And it's going to just get beat up and scratched up outside anyway. So I think this is it's going pretty well so far. So we'll see in a few minutes of this video how the transplant goes, and what the aftermath of using this in the Coco coir is. So the pot is flexible. It's not a super thick plastic, but considering how lightweight this material is going to be and how fluffy it is, it's not a big deal to not have basically a plastic fortress because I'm not using 50 pounds of sand and soil. So here's the obligatory Coco coir expanding footage that everyone shows online. So I watched a few of these videos before I delved into this and made the purchases. And right off the bat, I realized I used the wrong container shape. I should have gotten one of those big rectangular totes that's more wide in both dimensions than it is tall. So I picked not the worst possible container, but a pretty bad one because it all eventually ended up getting stuck on the bottom. So the claim is that this can make 15 gallons or slightly under worth of Coco coir once fully hydrated, and that you need basically 6.6 gallons, or is it 55 liters? Actually, I'm not even sure if that math works out. Yeah, I think they got the math wrong. But anyway, yeah, you add in your water. I used hot tap water. I don't even think the temperature matters. There are no smells. I hope the baking didn't won't accelerate the rotting process because I'm really looking for a growth medium that's very soft yet supportive because it has a springiness to it and very filled with airspace. So it'll be very aerated because the main thing your plant roots need, any root system needs, is actually plenty of oxygen and circulation of gases. And the reason I didn't want to use rotting organic material in the past is because I don't want something that's just going to rot away and deprive the soil or the potting mix of its oxygen and basically suffocate the plant roots and cause them to rot. So this stuff is very moist and pliable, and you can feel how soft and fluffy it is. So basically, I think it'll be a great medium, and I can't wait to see my plants growing in this, and it's just way easier than the setup I had going for the last few years. So I'm definitely open to trying this new method out and seeing where it gets me. But yeah, I chose the wrong container, and you can see I'm paying the price here already because in the end I spent so much time just sitting there outside at night picking with my hands to try to get it out of the bottom because it was kind of like compacted in there despite all the watering. It's day 835. I found out that there were many large crickets living underneath a lemon pot, and that's why you can see all of these cricket droppings. I'll wash everything away with a hose, and they will no doubt find refuge underneath my other plants, which proved to be the case later on. So I'm doing the transplants for all of these plants on the same day, and I basically sacked an entire workday night for this. It was a lot of work. If you don't remember what the soil composition was for this pot, it's basically 75% washed play sand that's store-bought from Lowe's and 25% filtered clay soil from the hills of San Diego from a few apartments ago from where I used to live. So this is the root system of the second born. It looks mostly functional. It looks old and there's no new growth, but it's not dead. So I don't really understand why it didn't respond at all and resprout. But it's been under too much stress probably, and since the move from infestation, it's not really clear what stripped off the bark in that ring around it at the base of the main stem, but it just never resprouted and recovered. So that makes the decision very easy to just transplant this firstborn and hope that it lives, and I'm fairly confident that it will. And obviously, since I'm making an episode about this, it did. So this is a very easy material to manipulate. Unfortunately, it didn't work out well. It made sense on paper based on, I believe, that Gary's Best Gardening channel of that third generation grower in is it Orange County, I believe, where he says basically the root systems of plants need to breathe. So if you have them in rotting potting mix, then that fast rate of decay uses up all of the oxygen the microbes do from the rot in the soil, and that suffocates your roots and they die. So it's a sound scientific principle, but in reality, if you have a medium that's rotting at a low rate, as he says, such as Coco coir, which I'm going to do the transplant into, then I think it can work really well despite it being organic. And the firstborn's root system looks a lot more robust, although there's very little new growth. It still looks quite underwhelming. I would say there's like a string of new growth in terms of roots, but I had expected the entire pot to be root bound with this many months and years passing by. So this is basically a recovery project, and I'm piping in this very soft and pliable Coco coir. So as I mentioned in my other recent 2022 springtime transplant videos, if you just hold this plant up in the center and center it well and hold it up a little higher than you actually want it to be in its final resting spot, because your hand will tire. Actually, it's not so much that, it's just that when you dump a bunch of growing medium onto the root system, it tends to pull it down. And over the course of the transplant, it's easy to end up in a lower position than you want to be and have the base of the stem be underneath the soil line, which is annoying. And then sometimes you'll have to redo the whole thing or kind of shift it around. But this is a very pliable mix, growing medium, and it's sort of an organic springy material. So even though it's not tightly packed in, it really does a good job at maintaining plant positioning and posture compared to other things like potting mix, where you do your first watering and everything just kind of sinks and sags. And likewise, even with a sand and soil mixture, that can happen. So it's day 836. I started applying this Bayer BioAdvanced 3-in-1 insect disease and mite control. I figured this has a lot of problems, so I needed to have a chemical solution for that. So it's day 858. As you saw, there was a bark covered root, sort of an offshoot for the root system. So plants always grow in their roots first and develop there before you see a noticeable explosion of growth in the shoot system. So that's what I'm hoping is happening here. So you can see there's insect predation and other signs of damage. So this thing has been constantly under siege. I get the impression that so many animals out there of various kinds love to eat citrus leaves. So I pruned off the dead section of the stem and these little top offshoots that are not doing too well. Overall, the leaves always look like they're in a state of disease. Viruses, they've got these little yellow spots. Very few of these woes can actually be blamed on the full sun transition from a partial sun situation in all the previous apartments. So some mystery bug pupated and rolled up lemon leaves. That's yet another problem. There's probably all sorts of visitors to this plant that I'm not aware of. So I don't know what that bug is. If you know, please let me know in the comments. But I didn't physically see it, or I don't think I did. So yeah, I haven't really devoted that much time to staring at my plants like I did in the first few years, but there's always a lot of interesting stuff going on, and these are starting to attract bugs nonstop, despite me spraying that Bayer BioAdvanced 3-in-1 insect miticide and fungicide. So it's day 873. As you can see, it's going to take a few weeks, but there are some new leaves, leaf primordia popping out. This main stem, well, the new main stem or offshoot is getting taller. You can see one of the leaves has a hole in it, and this leaf, it's the longest, largest one ever, but it's a little deformed. It's got a weird shape to it. So I was filming pretty much every week, and whenever you see me watering with this big 2-gallon or 1.75 gallon watering pail, That's when I have fertilizer in there, meaning Miracle-Gro fertilizer, all-purpose plant food, mixed in with a little bit of crushed multivitamins to add calcium and other micronutrients that are missing in the all-purpose plant food. So yeah, I do that every 2 weeks, and it's worked really well. This plant actually doesn't need much water at all. It just needs to have damp soil, unlike some of my other plants, which really started to take off around this time and soon outgrew their pots and are in sore need of a transplant. And I'm saying this as of October 2022, actually. So everything really took off after this transplant, proving that it's not necessarily true that something will do well in just sand or a sand and clay soil mixture. The purpose of that sand and clay soil mixture in the beginning of the series was to ensure that there would be maximum aeration for the root system. And I think it's proving that these results that we've seen thus far already at this point in the video already show that that's not necessarily the case. That's why, in science you do the experiments, you test things out, and you see what works. You don't just go on principle. So the principles behind my original decisions, let's say 2 or 3 years ago, to shift to all sand and clay soil mixtures, that was based on all of the disastrous results I had with potting mix earlier on, which always came infested with bugs and parasites, and it caused root rot. So there were a lot of fungal infections as well. So that was all done in the context of coming off of failures there. You can see there's a leaf miner. So I have a minor leaf miner infestation. I'm just going to go ahead and squeeze that. I don't know how bad this infestation is going to be, but it's very easy to spot. And I had never had leaf miners before, but I suppose that's what it looks like. They burrow underneath the cuticle and just eat away. So it's day 910. There's evidence of further root development, which is very promising for the future shoot development of this plant. So going back to what I was saying earlier, the potting mix was a disaster. There were springtails, spider mites, all sorts of problems, root rot. Oftentimes I would germinate things indoors, different kinds of seeds, and as soon as they got transplanted into potting mix and went outside, they would die. So off of the backdrop of that, I went to sand and clay soil, and while that didn't kill the plants and allowed them to start growing, they often got off to really, really slow starts. And that made me think that perhaps the sand and clay soil mixtures were not as breathable as I thought they were. And part of that was due to the pots I made. Because I was using sand, I didn't want all the sand running out of the bottom in the clay soil. So I double stacked these soft plastic Rubbermaid trash cans and drilled holes for drainage. But if you compare them to these pots or these other self-watering pots, like that one for the Joshua tree in the top right in the background, those have a lot of big slots on the bottom in the watering tray for aeration. And that's not a feature that I had for the self-made planters that I just described. So I think that's a big reason too for the poor aeration. But this Coco coir is a very fluffy material, and plants have great structural support, postural support, and tons of aeration for oxygen to get to the roots, which is what they need. They need to get oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. So you can see there's already been a lot of progress, although leaf miners have claimed some of these top leaves on the tallest offshoot, and they still continue to do. I actually don't know what the adult form of that bug looks like. I haven't seen one on this lemon plant, but this is a problem that's only concerning this lemon plant and none of my other plants. So insects and animals, they definitely have preferences based on the smells, fragrances that are given off. And citrus has a very overpowering fragrance for these insects, predators, and parasites. So it's day 938. I stopped applying that Bayer BioAdvance 3-in-1. I made a big stock in the beginning, and I would restock in my spray bottle and come out and spray my plants every 2 weeks. But maybe that's not meant to just sit even in a cool, dark cupboard after you dilute it in water, and maybe that's why the effectiveness is gone, or maybe that just won't work against leaf miners and these little yellow spots, which are probably caused by, I don't know, probably some kind of plant virus. I'm not too sure, but this plant grown from seed has been plagued with diseases and parasites since the very beginning, to a degree that I've never seen with any of my other plants that made it this far. So you can see there's still some growth. So that comes into the equation when you have growth that exceeds the amount of predation. You have good growing conditions and the plant's healthy, then you basically can survive anything that nature throws at your plant. So these are bird poop caterpillars, and they started appearing. At first I thought they were just bird poop, and I tried to wash them off with a hose or flick them off, and they were very stationary when they were young, and now they're much bigger and they have more coloration to the point where it's very obvious to the human eye, but I don't see any predators or animals eating these. So as you can see, there's been a lot of leaf damage, although the overall rising tide is lifting all boats, so to speak, because there's just so much growth that I can afford to have caterpillars eat my lemon plant. And at first I was considering whether I wanted to exterminate them, but then I decided not to, even though they look pretty ugly when they're in the early instars. Now that they're in the middle instars, maybe the third or fourth, they look pretty interesting. I'm just assuming that these have 5 or 6 instars, like some of the other caterpillars that I've done research with or worked with. So this is very interesting. I love watching caterpillars eat, but at the same time it's kind of conflicting because my lemon plant's been through all of this, and finally I'm just letting these caterpillars have a buffet and eat everything. So it's a very interesting caterpillar. It's sort of translucent. It's got these boils on top, or what look like boils, and all these unpleasant colors and patterns to make it seem like it's a bird dropping. And you can see the one in the background moving as well. You can see eggs that haven't hatched. You can see 2 of them in this screen. I'll show you some eggs that have hatched later on. So we've got the entire life cycle going on around here. I haven't actually seen the butterflies yet, but you can see they eat pretty fast, and then they spend a lot of time resting. If they just ate like this continuously, then the entire plant would be defoliated and dead. See, there's an empty egg casing. On day 960, I finally met their mother, or the butterfly I presume to have laid all these eggs that started this entire life cycle, or it could be some other butterfly. Maybe there are many in the area. So this is a butterfly that I've seen before. Actually, I just never knew what it was, and it's very darty and sort of wary in its flight path. You can see all the caterpillar droppings on the ground. There's a lot of those. I wash them away with a hose every few days as I water. And you can see how this would be a very difficult butterfly to catch. It's aware of my presence vaguely. If I get too close to the plant or place my cell phone on a tripod right next to it, it'll sort of avoid the tripod even. So it's a very wary butterfly, and this is a perfectly evolved butterfly to predate on these plants and survive. The bird poop caterpillars are hard to spot. You just think that they're bird droppings, and at various stages, which I'll show you later, they're just so well camouflaged, although it seems like some predators have figured out their crappy camouflage, so to speak. So this butterfly is it's a very fast flyer, and it's really hard to just even get some good footage of it, and even when I do, I have to do some slow motion replays to properly look at its markings, but it's mostly yellow and black, and it's got some other colors as well. This one has a little bit of red on it, as I'll show you later. So you can see everything, the eggs, the caterpillars at different instars, and the butterfly, and I always just see one at a time. And that's basically it. It's a very interesting experience to have wild butterflies on my plant. I raised some silkworms when I was a kid, and that was very interesting as well. So I'll show you more about these very interesting caterpillars. And this is a slow motion. You can see sort of a a reddish orange, maybe it's more orange on the bottom of the wings. And here are what the caterpillars look like later on. So I think this is about the fourth instar, if I'm reading this correctly online, where it says they more resemble what you traditionally think of bird poop, although at this point they do remind me more of silkworms. They don't look so gross, and I think this caterpillar may be aware of my presence, barely, but when I went to pet one, it stuck out these orange tentacles, and I sniffed this really strong and concentrated orange scent. And you may think, well, why does it smell like orange if these are lemon trees? Well, I'm sure they have the same compounds, and they were all bred from the same plant ancestors. So just by eating so many of these lemon leaves, it ends up having a scent that's a really concentrated form of orange smell, almost to the point of maybe inducing nausea in birds and other predators. But for me, you can see it made some contact with my fingernail, and then I whiffed a very strong hint of orange. And likewise, if you water on the trunk where some of these are hiding, then they can give off that orange concentrated scent as well. So it definitely won't deter a human, but it could deter a much smaller animal with a much better sense of smell that will just get overwhelmed. And you can see there's not just one, but two caterpillars, even a third one if you look closely, if you pause the footage. So these are masterfully camouflaged. They look like they're part of the stem, so their behavior is also adapted to the stage at which they're at, and their camouflage as well. So by day 965, the branch tips were all defoliated. As I said, they love to eat the new leaves because they just taste a lot better. And it's just like us eating vegetables. We want baby spinach instead of spinach that has giant, old, tough leaves. So this is what it looks like, and I can show you a chrysalis, or what I presume to be one. It's somewhere on there, but basically all of the caterpillars disappeared seemingly overnight. And then I had this, but this looks like something that never quite finished making a chrysalis or pupating. And it just seems like the head is bitten off. It seems like it just some predator took a bite out of it. So I assume a bird or wasps figured out this camouflage and ate them all. But based on the way this seems to have been eaten, I assume it was a bird, probably just one bird, because I know birds have big appetites and they can just eat everything. And it kind of looks like there's sort of like decaying, maybe half-eaten caterpillar matter on top of the cocoa coir there. So I don't think that one's ever going to emerge or hatch. And then by day 981, hundreds of new leaves spawned all over in response to the general pause in growth after this huge caterpillar plague. So I never saw a single giant swallowtail emerge. I didn't dig around in the cocoa coir because I didn't want to smush them by accident if they were forming chrysalises down there. And I read that the natural survival rate to adulthood is only 10%. So that was pretty dismal. I saw maybe 4 adult instar or final instar caterpillars that look like silkworms. They're very soft to the touch. I knew they wouldn't be poisonous to the touch, although I read that they're poisonous to ingest. So I'm not sure if that orange stuff getting on my fingernails was going to be poisonous, but I washed my hands really well several times with soap for a few minutes with water afterwards, just in case. I didn't want to eat a snack later and get a case of mild poisoning. And you can see this offshoot coming off of the bottom of the base of the stem. So this chrysalis or half-eaten one is just not doing anything. And on day 985, the giant swallowtail returned, or maybe it's a different one. I'm sure there are many in the neighborhood, and I think although they have great color vision and great vision in general, they do find these plants by their sense of smell, is what I think is going on. So the lemon tree has come a really long way, and I think this is a slow grower compared to my other fruit trees. And I'm basically going to wait until it gets much bigger than this before I do a transplant. You can see the ice cream bean in the background. It's just completely overwhelmed this so-called 5-gallon pot. It's probably more like a 3.5-gallon pot. Overall, I'm very glad that this caterpillar series happened. It added a lot of spice and interest into this lemon series, and I think the future of this lemon plant is ensured. It's going to become huge like all of my other fruit trees and successful over the next few months. So stay tuned to my channel, and thank you for watching.